Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm really excited to start a brand new video series today that I will be doing about every 3 months, where I basically talk through and review all the books that I've read over winter, spring, summer, autumn. So today I'm going to be going through all the books that I've read this winter. I am very excited to talk through them all because I have recently really got into a reading something. I don't know what. I've just been reading, which is crazy. I love it. I love when I get back into reading again. I'll go like a whole year and not read a thing and then read a million books. One thing I wanted to point out is, if you've been following me on social media or on the community tab on my channel, you'll know that I have been really sick, like really sick. And I'm only just coming out of it now. This is the first day that I've like straightened my hair, put makeup on, got dressed, it's made my bed, whole new world, but I still sound pretty sick and my voice is kind of going up and down. So just so you know, that's why I'm not really sounding tip top and why my brain might not be working properly. But I'm gonna try my best because I've been wanting to talk about these books for a really long time, so let's just get into it. Okay, let's start with the rereads first of all, because they're probably the least interesting. So they're books that I've read before but decided to read again, and surprise surprise, it's Harry Potter. I try and reread the Harry Potter books once a year, so I started in December reading through them, and this is as far as I've got at the moment. So I read Philosopher's Stone, Chamber of Secrets, and Prisoner of Azkaban. So they're the 3 I've read so far. I'm currently reading Goblet of Fire, but that's quite a big one, so I think that's going to take me into spring, so that will hopefully be in my spring what I read video. I don't really need to go over the plot. I feel like if you've been on this channel, you know what Harry Potter is about, but essentially it goes through the first 3 years of Harry Potter's time at wizard school, essentially. And again, I feel like I don't really need to review them, but I will say Prisoner of Azkaban always absolutely slaps. I think it's my favourite book of them all. Philosopher's Stone is great, obviously sets the whole thing up, but actually not a lot happens. I was surprised. I'm always surprised when I read it that not a lot happens, and all the action, especially when you compare it to the film, all the action happens in like the last 2 chapters. It's actually the same with Prisoner of Azkaban. The whole time turner stuff happens in 1 chapter, like right at the very end, whereas it's such a huge part of the film. Chamber of Secrets to me is such a cozy read. It's definitely like my cozy book. So overall, I mean, they're all getting 5 out of 5. They're fantastic. This is my first time reading through this cover set as well that I got. The kind of, I think it's the children's covers, but I just think they're beautiful, and I dropped them all over the floor. I just think they're beautiful. So yeah, that's those are the first 3 books. Get them out the way because I didn't really have a whole lot to say. I don't really know what order to go in. I'll just pick them up as I find them. The next one is Shiver. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm cheating a little bit. I've probably got about 50 pages left, and I know I'm gonna finish it tomorrow, but I only had today to film this video, so there was nothing I could do. But I have actually read this book before. This is technically a reread. I should say it's by Maggie Stiefvater. I think that's how you say it. But I first read this trilogy when they first came out, so I'm thinking at least 10 years ago. So I remembered that it's a book about werewolves, spoiler alert, but I didn't really remember much else, so it really was like a first read to me. They used to have these gorgeous silvery covers, and I couldn't find them. I could only find these black ones that I don't like very much. But as you can probably tell, these books came out during like the Twilight Renaissance, where basically everyone wanted to write paranormal, supernatural romance books. So this is about a girl who falls in love with a werewolf, essentially. But the reason I wanted to read these, sorry if you can hear Jolene chewing away in the background, is because they're very wintry, and I just felt like reading lots of wintry books this season. It's lots of descriptions about like the cold and the snow, and it's right on the border of Canada, so it has got a very cozy wintry feel about it, and it's perfect for reading on days like this. You probably can't tell, but it is storming so bad outside, like the wind is crazy, it's shaking the whole house, so reading a book like this is very cozy. That being said, I wouldn't really say it stood the test of time. When I first read these books when I was a teenager, I loved them. But now, obviously, I'm at least a decade older, and I think I'm a bit sick of the whole like special girl kind of trope, like she's different to all the other girls and that's why the brooding werewolf / vampire is in love with her. You know, it doesn't hold my attention as well as it used to. So I'm gonna finish it. I don't think I'm gonna read the other two, but I'm glad I read it. You know, it's good fun. I'm getting through it at quite a fast pace. The chapters are really short, which I like. I don't like long chapters in books. Much prefer quick short chapters. So yeah, it's been fun, but I wouldn't rate this one very highly. Unless you're still into that kind of genre, I wouldn't recommend reading this or rereading it if you read it before. The next book I got for Christmas, and it was such a surprise. I had it on my to read, but only because I just thought it sounded kind of funny. I wasn't really expecting a whole lot from it, but it's The Christmas Appeal by Janice Hallett. So this is actually a sequel to a book I haven't read, which I didn't realise, called The Appeal, which is now very much on my to-read list. So this is The Christmas Appeal, so it's kind of like a fun little spin-off kind of book. It's very short. I read it in an hour, which I love. And then everyone else in my household also read it the same day. It's really short, really quick to read. But oh my gosh, this was my surprise favourite book of this whole season. I loved it. It's so fun. So it's about this community that has an amateur dramatics group that are putting on a Christmas play for the community, but there's a dead Santa essentially that's found there, and so they have to find out who's the dead person, who killed them. It's a murder mystery essentially. It's got a very Knives Out feel to it. It's very tongue-in-cheek, very funny, nothing's taken too seriously, and it's really, really good. If you're looking for like a big shock twist, like who done it, this isn't for you. This is very silly, very tongue-in-cheek. It's not really about who the murderer was. It's about the journey essentially to getting there. It's actually signed, which I didn't realize when I got it, but it's actually all in texts and emails, which is why it's so easy to read. And you might think like me, when I first opened it and saw it was text and emails, I was like, oh no, because if a book uses a trope like that, it normally doesn't mean good things. But actually it was hilarious, and all the characters are constantly like passive aggressively emailing each other, or they'll email one person one thing and then immediately email a contradicting thing to someone else, and all the characters are so fleshed out and so good. And honestly, I was properly laughing when I read this, and that doesn't happen all that often. I actually don't laugh out loud at much media all that often. I might scoff, but this was properly had me laughing. So I actually think this might be my favourite thing I've read this whole season, The Christmas Appeal. It was so good, and I'm definitely going to read The Appeal because it's basically the same thing, just not Christmas themed. So yeah, I cannot recommend getting this enough, and it only takes an hour to read, so even if you don't love it, you're not exactly wasting too much of your time. The next thing I read was actually mandatory. The next thing I read was actually mandatory for my university course. We had to read Twelfth Night, which I did read, but I didn't really want to talk about it. It was so boring. And Jane Eyre. And it's a huge book, and I've never read a classic before. So I was very, very intimidated. This is not the set text we were supposed to buy. We were supposed to buy one that had like annotations about the book, but this one was so pretty. I was like, no, I'm buying this one, which is just straight up the book. It's gorgeous. It's the Wordsworth edition books, so they're all so pretty. They make me want to buy them just so I can have the spines. So yeah, very nervous about reading this, thinking I was not going to get all the way through it. But you know what? Again, another surprise. I really, really liked it. Like really liked it. I want to read more of the Brontes stuff now. So if you don't know, it's basically the diary of this woman called Jane Eyre, and just sort of going through her life from a child all the way up to adulthood, ranging from, you know, being very poor as a child, all the way up to, and being like mistreated, all the way up to being an adult where she works as a, what's the word when you're basically a teacher? There's a proper word for it. Basically teaches and nannies this child in this big house, and falls in love with the lord of the manor. Spoiler alert, this is a very old book, you probably know. They get married, but he actually already has a wife that he's hidden in the attic, and she's insane, and it's very gothic and very dramatic, and it's crazy. I read the first 100-200 pages. I was like, oh no, this is so boring. All the stuff with her as a child really did nothing for me at all. But then it time jumps to when she's older, as an adult, and she's got her first job and everything. And from then on, like here on, madness. I couldn't put it down. I was reading and reading and reading. And I mean, it is not a welcoming book. Like, look at that. It does not make you want to like sit down and read. Like, there's so many pages, the text is so small, but I was obsessed. I really liked it. I don't have a whole lot to say. It's a classic, so it is quite hard to read. The way the wording is I think because I read this after Shakespeare, I was like, this is easy. But yeah, it's not the easiest to read. So if you're just looking to get back into reading, this maybe isn't the book for you. But if you're already quite an avid reader and something like this doesn't scare you all that much, definitely recommend it. But I have this book to thank because I am now really into reading classics and just trying to generally improve my knowledge of classic literature. So yeah, and you'll see there's another one here that I read because I read Jane Eyre, so got a lot to thank for this one. So I'll just go straight into the next one. Again, Wordsworth edition, Little Women. How gorgeous is that? I keep forgetting to say the names of who wrote them. Louisa May Alcott, of course, this is another classic. So I decided to read this, number one, because I wanted to add to my Pretty Spine collection, but number two, because I wanted to, again, just read more classics. And I thought, well, let's start with the Wordsworth edition books. They're supposed to be all the classics, and see where we go from there. But again, I really enjoyed this book. It's not as intimidating. Number one, you probably can't tell, but the writing's a bit bigger. It's not as long, and I generally found the way it was written much easier to understand. I didn't have to think as much about it. But yeah, it's a really good story. Obviously pretty dated. It is feminist literature, 100%. But some of the stuff is like, I don't know about that. But it's a really good book. It's just about sisters and them just sort of living their lives while their dad's off fighting in the Civil War. And they befriend Laurie, the boy next door, and just kind of get into different adventures. And, you know, there's highs, there's lows. You know, actually, not a lot actually happens in this book, but it's more about the characters. So I knew what happened because I'd seen Little Women, the film, but I was very confused because I finished this book and I was like, wait, all this stuff I remember happening in the film didn't happen in this book. That's because they put the first and second book into one film, Good Wives, Little Women. I didn't know that. So I've bought Good Wives, so that will hopefully be in my next book review. So I've just read Little Women at the moment, so I know what's going to happen. But yeah, overall, really fun. I think I preferred this to Jane Eyre, but I had more to say about Jane Eyre because it kind of sparked this passion for classic books. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what I end up reading next from this collection. But so far, it's been 2 for 2. Jane Eyre, Little Women. I really enjoyed both of them. Let's switch things up a little bit. Completely different genre switch. I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This is a non-fiction book. I've been wanting to read this for a really long time. I mean, it's been on my to-read list for years. So essentially, Michelle McNamara basically became obsessed with the Golden State Killer, who is a real serial killer that operated in California, who I already knew about because I'm really into true crime. I have a freaking master's degree in criminology and criminal justice. Like, I know my serial killers. Do you know what I mean? But she became obsessed. So she's not a police officer or anything, but she just started investigating the case and was really keen to find out who the Golden State Killer actually was, because it's been unsolved for all these years. So it includes like interviews with police officers and just generally all the things that she's managed to find to, you know, catch the Golden State Killer. So she actually died right before this was published. Very sadly, it is such a heartbreaking story. So the people that she worked with, like her husband and the police officers that she worked with, put the book together and put it out because she'd done all the work. They were like, let's put it out there. And then not long after they died, they actually found the Golden State Killer, which is crazy. So there's a bit of a thing afterwards, again, obviously not from her, but from people who knew her, talking about adding on a little bit about how they found the Golden State Killer, which was actually through 23andMe. They found one of his relatives and tracked him down from there. It's a crazy story. Recommend looking into, even if you're not going to read this book, I recommend looking into the story of the Golden State Killer. But it's just got a very bittersweet ending because obviously she never got to find out who this guy was, but put in a lot of the work towards being able to find out who he was. So it's a very sad story, and obviously it's sad anyway because you're hearing about all these horrible things that happen to people. But it is a very well written book. It's very gripping, not one you want to read at night, I'll tell you that much. And you can just feel the passion in her as she writes about this situation and wanting to find justice for the people that were killed or harmed or affected in any way. So it's a very interesting read, not something I've ever read before, not this type of stuff, but I definitely would be interested in reading more factual true crime books because of this. But this is definitely like the one, you know. I mean, it's an HBO series. Lots of people talk about it, so this is kind of like the big one to start with, but I'd certainly be interested in reading more. But I rate this book very highly, but I know it's not for everybody, that's for sure. If you're at all sensitive, I mean, it's very graphic, like very, very graphic. So just something to be aware of, that it's not going to be for everyone. But if you deal with a lot of true crime stuff, like you watch a lot of documentaries, podcasts, that kind of thing, you'll be fine. It's more of that. The next one's a bit of a weird one. So it was another classic one that I wanted to read, All Quiet on the Western Front, because I really enjoyed the new film that had come out by Erich Maria Remarque. I know the original is in German. So I was like, perfect, I'll buy it, I'll read it. And I got this. And I was like, I don't know much about the original book. Maybe it is the small. Maybe it's just one of those that's basically like a poem. And I have to say, this book's gorgeous. Loads of pictures, very easy to read. I was like, this isn't written very well. Anyway, as it turns out, and I have to say, I was falsely advertised to. 100%. It did not advertise itself as this. But it's a miniature masterpiece. So essentially it explains the book and all the major plot points. It's called Baker Street Readers. It's kind of like the series. So like, for example, if you're just trying to introduce a subject to somebody, like for example, if you're maybe teaching younger students about World War One, this would maybe be like a good thing, so I don't have to read a whole book. But basically it's the major plot points with pictures, and it was very good. Like, it was fun to read, I enjoyed it, but it's not the full book, so cannot recommend that unless you're like a teacher or something. So that was kind of annoying. So that one's gonna end up staying on my to read list because I've not read it. The first book I actually read this series was Heartstopper, number 1, edition 1, volume 1, that's what they call it, by Alice Osman. And I read this because I love the TV show. Like, I'm obsessed with the TV show. I've watched each series like 50 times. I just think it's the sweetest thing ever. If you don't know, it's basically about 2 gay boys in high school finding each other, getting into adventures with their friends. It's very, very, very sweet. So I was like, well, you know what? May as well. I've never read a graphic novel before. Give it a go. I know I like the story. And guys, you're going to hate me because everyone loves this book. I didn't like it very much. It really wasn't my cup of tea. I think graphic novels aren't for me. You get through it very quick. I read it in one sitting, even though it's quite big. I never realized it was ombre. That's cute. But I just found it kind of annoying actually to read. It's just not my cup of tea. I don't know, maybe it's an autistic thing. I don't know, but I just need words on a page. I can't deal with words here, there and everywhere, and I just generally found it a bit lacking. Like, a lot of the things that I loved from the TV show weren't in the book, and I just found the book a bit basic. Now, I feel bad saying that because I know it was originally just a free web thing that she did, and because of growing popularity, they put it into a book. So I appreciate I'm reading it maybe not in the format it was originally intended for, and maybe if I go into further volumes that were designed for books, I would feel differently. But I just felt that there wasn't much substance to it, and I was just expecting a bit more. No offense if you love it, that's totally fine. It just is not for me. The next book's a strange one. So it's a non-fiction one, and I got it from Disneyland Paris, and it is the part of the L'Attraction Decryptée books, Decrypted Attractions. I'm so good at French. I've already got the Pirates of the Caribbean one, and they had the Phantom Manor one out when I was there, so I had to pick it up. And essentially it just talks through the ride, the attraction. So obviously for Haunted Mansion and Pirates of the Caribbean, it talks through its inception, its role in all the different Disney parks, how it works, behind the scenes secrets and things like that. And these books are just absolutely beautiful. Loads of artwork. Everything's in English and French, so you can read it either way or both if you're nasty. And yeah, the whole thing is just gorgeous. It's pictures, it's illustrations, it's original concept art. It's got an absolutely gorgeous painting in the back of the land that it's in, Frontierland. And if you're really into Disney parks and Disney parks lore and background like I am, these books, honestly, I cannot recommend them enough. I mean, look at that concept art. That is so cool. It's amazing. Again, very short, read it in an hour, which is what I did. I just sat and read the whole thing while I was sick, but they're amazing, and they're really cool coffee table books as well. So the only one I'm missing is Space Mountain. I'm sure they'll make more, but so far they've only got the 3. I've never been on Space Mountain, I'm too scared, but I do want to pick up the book, but they didn't have it when I was there. So hopefully next time I go, I can get Space Mountain, or if you know where to find it, let me know. But yeah, very cool. And this one's purple and the other one's black, and they just look really nice. So definitely not for everyone, but if you're a theme park person, you're into your Disney parks, a very good book. The next book, I've read this such a long time ago now. It's been like 3 months. This is crazy. It's Joe Nesbo's The Snowman. And I read this because, again, I was looking for books themed in winter, and this is based in, I actually can't remember if it's Norway or Sweden, but I think it's Sweden. Set in winter, the snowman, it's all based around snow and it's all set in the winter, and again, atmospherically very good. And Joe Nesbo is very famous for his Scandinavian crime thrillers, which my mum was really into for a while, so I kind of know about the genre. So I was like, you know what, I'll give it a go. But guys, I have to say, really did not enjoy this at all. It's a thick book, and it was a slog to get through. And again, I know I'm in a minority here because this is a very famous book. It's like one of the top Scandinavian crime thriller books, but I just didn't like it. I didn't find the mystery, the crime, engaging enough, nor did I think it had a good enough payoff. I was surprised by the outcome, but it wasn't sort of worth getting through this whole thick book for me. On top of that, I found Harry Hull, who's the main character, very, very unlikable, and I think he's written to be fairly unlikable, but I mean, this guy is racist, he's sexist, and it doesn't come across in the book as like, and you're supposed to dislike him for these. It just sort of comes across like that's okay, and it just made me feel very uncomfortable, some of the things that were being said. Call me a snowflake if you want, but yeah, I felt quite uncomfortable reading this. I don't know why I bothered reading the whole thing, but I did. But it's really, really not for me. Maybe I have too delicate a sensibility, who knows, but did not enjoy it. Definitely going to be donating this one. I do not want to keep it, so it was not for me. Next, we have Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. This one was a bit of a random one. Again, I was going for those wintry themed books. So I was like, let's give this a read. I just picked it up randomly. It was recommended on Goodreads. I was like, let's give it a go. It seems light and fluffy. So essentially, it's about this girl who is at university, college. It's set in America, so college. And she is training to be a professional figure skater, and she takes it very, very seriously. And then because of the ice rink being damaged, they basically have to squash up with the university's ice hockey team, and she ends up pairing up as a figure skating pair with one of the hockey players. It's a romance story. It's like a light-hearted comedy romance story, and you know what, again, another surprise, I loved this. I really loved it. This isn't normally my kind of book. I mean, I don't mind reading a romance, they're fun enough. But actually, I really, really enjoyed this one. It is quite rude to the point where, again, it's not my cup of tea, rude books. I was like, this isn't really necessary to go into this much detail in this kind of book. But apart from that, it's a really, really good story. I really like the characters. Lots of really fun background characters as well. Like, everything's fleshed out quite well. I really enjoy things set on ice for some reason. I really enjoy ice skating stories. I've watched Ice Princess, the film, about 1 million times when I was younger. But yeah, this, I don't really actually have a lot to say. It's just sort of a paint by numbers romance book, but I just really enjoyed it. It was just really fun to read. I always looked forward to reading it. It was very hard to put down. I'm definitely going to keep this and read this more than once. There's a sequel, Wildfire, about 2 of the background characters, which I do have, so that's going to be one of my spring reads. But I just can't, because I kind of fell in love with these characters, so I just can't imagine liking that one more than this one, because I'm so attached to these guys, and I kind of just wish she'd done a sequel with them. I want to know where their lives go from there. But it is a really, really fun book. It does read a little bit like it was maybe a Wattpad book first that turned into a book. Maybe nothing wrong with that, but that's just the vibe I get. But I cannot recommend this enough if you quite like, light-hearted, fun, fluffy romance books. It's a really good one, especially one set in winter. I feel like a lot of them are set in the summer, so it's quite nice to have a nice cozy little winter one. So I feel like I'm gonna reread this quite soon as well, so it might end up in a reread in spring, who knows, but very fun book, enjoyed it a lot. And our very last book is The Haunting Season, Ghostly Tales for Long Winter Nights. Not really by anyone in particular. This is a collection of short stories from different authors that are spooky, scary, and are set in winter. Perfect for me. I love scary stuff. I love horror. I wanted a book that was cozy and set in winter. This one is said to be perfect for if it's galing outside, it's a snowstorm, curl up and read this. Perfect. So I was very excited to read this. So obviously, because it's a bunch of different stories, I've got my notes here. I just wrote a little bit about each individual story because I knew I wasn't going to remember them all. So the first one is A Study in Black and White by Bridget Collins, and this is about a man who rents out this house, and he can't stop thinking about the shrubbery outside in the garden that are shaped like giant chess pieces, and the residents of the town seem very wary about the house, and he starts to become more unsettled as the cold nights draw in. Very The Shining inspired, if you've read the book with the maze and like the moving hedge pieces, very similar vibe. It was a bit slow. Also, all my synopses, I'm going to try not to spoil them just in case you want to read them. So it won't really say too much about what the actual like supernatural or spooky things are. It was a bit slow considering it was a short story. I was like, not a lot's actually happening here. It's not the kind of story that really interests me all that much. I appreciated it had a lot of suspense as it was building up. Again, very slow build considering how short a story it was. But I felt like the ending could have been a lot scarier and could have been more of a shock. I was basically just like, oh. And it ended and I was like, oh. That was it. Okay, wasn't worth my time, essentially. I'm quite hard to scare, so maybe I'm just going to be a tough critic here. But yeah, it didn't really do much for me, especially as the first story, the introduction to this book. I was just a bit like, we'll see. The second one is called Thwaites Tenant by Imogen Hermes Gower, and it's about a woman who runs away with her child with the help of her father to escape her abusive husband, and hiding away the horrors of misogyny and her father forcing her to return to her husband and her fear of losing her child. But they're not the only thing scaring her. Leave it there. And she meets a woman who was in a very similar situation a long time ago. I felt the main character was very unlikable and made very strange decisions, but I definitely don't think that was the way it was supposed to be written. But I get that it's like the olden days and women didn't have a lot of autonomy or a lot of power and she was in a very difficult situation. But I do feel like some of her decisions just didn't make any sense. And I was like, you could be doing so many other things to help your child and you're just not, and it's very frustrating. It had scary moments for sure. I was kind of like, ooh, got those tingles, but not enough of them. Like I say, set in the past, which isn't my cup of tea generally, might be for others. It wasn't as good as the last story, but it was scarier. So it wasn't written as well, but it was scarier. So it depends what you're looking for. I'm going to try and go through these fairly quickly. The next one is The Eel Sinners by Natasha Pulley. So a clairvoyant, his partner and their child leave London for a relaxing holiday in the countryside where the clairvoyant's head can relax and isn't focused on all the ghosts and thoughts that are kind of always going into their head. However, the town that they come to has weird people and even weirder properties, and strange things happen during their stay. This is definitely the scariest one of the book. I felt very tense. It felt like a Twilight Zone episode. I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being something like that. It's a good length as well, just short enough to kind of leave you wanting a little bit more, which I like. It takes a while to make sense. It's not really clear who is who, and it takes quite a while into it to kind of fully establish, okay, this is who these characters are and how they're related to everybody and what their main purpose is. So that can be a little frustrating, but if you quite like the mystery, that'll be absolutely fine. So generally, I really enjoyed this one. It didn't blow me away, but it was good, but it didn't really make me want to like go and find all the author's other stuff, but it was good. I enjoyed reading it. The next one was Lily Wilt by Jess Kidd, where a photographer falls in love with a corpse of a beautiful woman that he photographs and becomes obsessed, seeing her ghost, hearing her voice, and decides to basically try and Frankenstein her back to life again. Oh, Jolene's there. Generally, I actually don't have much to say about this one. It was kind of boring and nothing really happened. Like what I've described is what happens. The ending is just kind of confusing and left me feeling a little bit blah, like I just don't have much to say. The concept's a good idea, but I feel like the worst sin you can have with any kind of media is that you just don't have anything to say about it. Like, even if you hate it, at least you've got some kind of passion about it, and I just don't have anything to say about this one. The next one is The Chillingham Chair by Laura Purcell. A woman breaks her leg, confining herself to a wheelchair that used to belong to the lord of the manor of the house that she's staying in. The man's son nurses her back to health, but all is not as it seems. I've written a little synopsis, and the Lord's mysterious disappearance may still be present in the chair. It was a fun read, again, not too long, kept a good pace up, so I was able to read it through in one go very easy. Again, I don't have a lot to say about this one. It was fun, it was enjoyable, but didn't really leave a lasting impression and really wasn't that scary. If you were in her situation, sure, it'd be terrifying, but to read, not so much. The Hanging of the Greens by Andrew Michael Hurley. A church official visits the house of an elderly couple in order to support them and kind of help them atone for his past mistakes. The house, however, has its own story to tell. I really enjoyed this one. It really kept me gripped, very unsettling, had a really interesting premise, and was the first time in this book that I'd come across a plot idea that I hadn't already read somewhere else. It was like an original idea. It's quite graphic, so when I was reading other reviews from this book that people had put up on Goodreads and stuff, a lot of people didn't like this one. They felt it was kind of unnecessarily graphic. I didn't mind. This is very folk horror, so if you like Midsommar, that kind of thing, I think this one will be for you. There is Confinement by Kieran Millward Hargrave. A pregnant woman is confined to one room of her house as a witchly presence takes over her baby. I said the other one was my favourite. I disagree. This was my favourite of the whole book. It was the only one that actually made me feel scared when I read through it, and also kind of scared afterwards and a bit unsettled. Really good visual storytelling. I could picture everything in my head, and the witch was really well written and generally just had really creepy moments, and it's one I would love to see put onto the screen in some form or another. It was a really, really cool, scary concept, and I just enjoyed it a lot. It was a fun one to read. So the final one is called Monster, and it is by Elizabeth McNeil. So I realized I forgot to write any notes for this one, but that's fine. I remember what happened. It's about a guy who goes to this town with his wife because he is desperate for fame, and he thinks what's going to make him famous is finding dinosaur fossils. But in his attempt to be famous, and he's so concerned with it and so keen to find these fossils, it basically leads to the death of a child and the whole town hating him, and he becomes completely paranoid and kind of obsessed with these fossils. Overall, barked but didn't move at all. Overall, it's a very unsettling one, and it's kind of got the best message, I think. You know, you can kind of see the moral story that's trying to be told, and I quite like books about people's descent into madness. I quite enjoy that, and you're kind of thinking like what's real and what's just imagined in their head. Really good, but definitely not one of my favourites, and not scary, but a fun sort of thrilling, chilling read in general. So those are all the stories. You get a good bang for your buck. There's a lot of stories in here, but generally, apart from one or two, most of them I was just kind of blah about and forgot about once I'd finished reading them. But there is another one. I think next winter I'll probably pick that one up and read that, because it was fun enough. I do enjoy just having short stories rather than having to commit to a massive one. Especially I read this around the same time I read Jane Eyre, so it was quite nice to read something that was a lot shorter and easier to read, but not as good as I felt it could have been, which was unfortunate. But yeah, that was all my books. So it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 books, which is a lot for me. I know it's not for some people, especially the people whose whole channels are about reading and books and things like that. But 14 for me in 3 months, that's a lot of books. So I'm really excited to continue this on, read a lot of books in spring. I can't wait. And I'll of course do a video around the end of spring as well, kind of showing you what I read. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you think, and I'd love recommendations, of course. I have a Goodreads, which I will link below if you want to have a look at what I've read, what I'm currently reading, what I want to read in the future, and we can have some discussions on there as well. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.